Hell, viewers. Tonight, I am going to do a podcast about the Frenzied Flame. It has been a long while since I've created an Elden Ring video on the channel, and I am basically playing through the game over again so that I can get to the DLC. And once I win it, I can talk about more things. But for my own way of essentially catching up on some of the old lore, as well as essentially refreshing your own understanding of it, and maybe give you some different and more interesting things to think about in regard to it, I have decided to create a notebook LM podcast with many of the notes and much of the information I've gained. So, essentially what a Google Notebook LM podcast is essentially podcasts with chatbots. They summarize all of the information into a very digestible format. And this will essentially help us understand some of the key things in the lore, some of the key symbolism and narrative influences in the game. So without further ado, I'd like to essentially play this.
Okay, so you guys really went all in on this one. Religion of the Frenzied Flame. Like, seriously, a deep dive into chaos itself.
Yeah, when we saw the stack of lore and philosophy you sent over, well, we knew this deep dive was going to be a wild one.
Wild is right. It's not just about fire and brimstone. It's about, questioning the very fabric of reality. Order, chaos, the whole shebang. So where do we even begin with this?
I think a good place to start is with the idea that the Frenzied Flame, it's not just some random cult of destruction. It's way deeper than that.
Deeper how? Like they have a 401k in dental.
Not quite. It's more like they see the Frenzied Flame as this representation of primordial chaos. The stuff that existed before order, before creation as we know it.
Like the cosmic soup, before things got all separated and organized.
Exactly. And the symbols they use are super interesting. There's this watery quality to the Frenzied Flame. And it's linked to the tears we see shed by its followers.
Tears? Like sad tears?
Not exactly. It's more like tears of raw potential, like the unformed essence of everything.
And this ties into the whole Primordial Crucible thing, right? Where everything was all mixed together at the very beginning.
We even have the dictionary definition here, just to be sure. Primordial, existing at or from the very beginning. So it's not just about destroying the world. It's about going back to that original state, the ultimate reset.
So they want to hit cruel plus alt plus delete on the universe?
Kind of. And the crucible itself, it's not just some random cooking pot. It's this heavy-duty symbol. J.E. Surlett's Dictionary of Symbols calls it a mother symbol. It represents transformation, rebirth, even spiritual gestation.
Like a cosmic room?
Yeah, exactly. It's that space of pure potential before things take on a definite form. So for the Frenzied Flame folks, chaos isn't just random destruction. It's the source of everything. It's fertile ground for, well, whatever might come next.
Okay, but this isn't just some made-up Elden Ring stuff, right?
Not at all. The idea that everything came from chaos, it's ancient. It pops up in tons of philosophies and mythologies. Well, Hesiod, the Greek poet, he talked about this confused mass of elemental substances that existed before the gods even showed up. Even Thomson, in his poem Autumn, he describes light struggling to emerge from this dubious gloom.
So they're tapping into some deep universal stuff here. This primordial chaos is like a state of pure oneness, right? No separation, no duality, no me versus you.
Absolutely. And that's a huge contrast to, say, the creation story in Genesis, where you have this formless void that gets shaped by a divine force.
So the Frenzied Flame followers would say that the imposition of order, that's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not alone in thinking about how order came to be. You have Anaxagoras, way back in ancient Greece. He believed there was this first mind that brought order to the chaos, like a cosmic organizer.
Okay, so like a super-powered Marie Kondo tidying up the universe.
Something like that. And then you have Philo-Judaeus, who believed that the spiritual realm, the world of intellect and reason that came before the physical world. And it's this intellect, this logos, that acted upon matter to create order.
So order is like a product of reason and consequence, like cause and effect.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah.
And the document you sent, it actually dives into the definitions of causality from a couple of dictionaries, like the Century Dictionary and Stedman's Medical Dictionary. And it's interesting. They emphasize how causality establishes order.
So without causality, without cause and effect, the world would just be chaos.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And those dictionaries, they don't hold back on their definitions of chaos either. Total disorganization, no constructive predicates, no causal relationships. They even mention entropy, that natural tendency for things to fall apart, as the opposite of this ordering process. So the Frenzied Flame, it's like they want to fast forward entropy, get back to that state where cause and effect don't even apply.
Okay, wow. So that's the theory. But what about the practice? Like, who are these Frenzied Flame folks and what are they actually up to?
Well, a good example is Hyetta, this blind woman who has a very particular diet.
Yeah, the whole shabriri grapes thing, like who snacks on eyeballs and why.
Right. And it's super significant that she's blind, because when she eats these grapes, she experiences this distant light.
Hold up, those grapes are actually...
Yep, eyes. Specifically the eyes of Frenzied Flame devotees. And it's not just some gross out thing. It's directly tied to her faith. Like, she's consuming their vision, their connection to the Frenzied Flame.
And the document makes this crazy connection to Jewish folklore. Shabriri, this demon of blindness. And the name means, get this, dazzling glare or breaker of the eyesight.
It's ironic, right? And there's even this incantation to make Shabriri powerless. It's like, by eating those eyes, Hyetta is both embracing and defying blindness.
It's all very symbolic. And then there's that whole thing about the eye being the light of the body from the Bible. Single eye, good eye, evil eye.
Yeah, that contrast is really interesting. And the Dictionary of Symbolism, it talks about how the eye is all about light and perception, both literally and spiritually. So even though Hyetta is physically blind, by eating those eyes, she's somehow gaining a different kind of sight, like a deeper understanding.
It's a messed up way to gain enlightenment, but okay.
Yeah, not exactly your typical self-help guru. And there's this thing called eye biting too, which is apparently an involuntary form of the evil eye in some traditions.
Okay.
So even though Hyetta is choosing to eat these eyes, it still taps into this primal fear of the eye as a source of power, something that can be taken and used.
So it's not just about seeing, it's about controlling what you see.
Maybe. And then there's that moment after you go through the sewers and the abyss and you find Hyetta again. She's been touched by the three fingers and she lays out the whole Frenzied Flame philosophy.
And it's intense. Like she says, everything came from this one great, and then there were these fractures and births and souls, but the greater will messed it all up.
Yeah, it's a pretty scathing critique of the whole system. Suffering, pain, all of it stems from the greater will's mistake. So the goal is to basically undo creation. Melt it all away, she says, with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
So it's not just about burning stuff, it's about undoing everything that separates us, going back to that primordial unity.
And they see the greater will as this kind of demiurge figure, imposing order and creating all these artificial divisions. The document actually defines demiurge from the Britannica Concise Encyclopedia. It's the one who shapes the world from pre-existing stuff.
But in a lot of Gnostic thought, the demiurge isn't a good guy, right?
Yeah, they often see him as this kind of flawed creator responsible for all the bad stuff in the world. And that Gnostic perspective is really important here. The idea that the creator is actually the villain, and that individuality, all the differences between things, that's the root of evil.
So it's like a total inversion of our usual way of thinking.
Right. And they even have this reverence for figures who defied the creator, like the serpent in the Garden of Eden, Prometheus, anyone who tried to break free from the imposed order.
And the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, the document mentions that too.
Yep, from the Encyclopedia of Magic and Alchemy. It's all about cycles, transformation, and ultimately the idea that all is one. It's even associated with Mercurius, the alchemical symbol of the union of opposites. So again, dissolving all the boundaries, merging everything back together.
And in some Gnostic traditions, the Ouroboros is straight up linked to the serpent in Eden, not as a tempter, but as a liberator. Like he was the one who showed humanity the truth, the way back to that original unity.
And then it gets even wilder, because in Gnostic thought, chaos, the abyss, is often seen as the supreme being, the ultimate source of everything. It's not something to be feared, it's something to be revered.
So the Frenzied Flame, it's not just destruction, it's like a return to the divine womb.
That's a good way to put it. And the document makes this interesting connection to Rykard and the Great Serpent. Their whole thing about devouring the gods, their fiery fluid nature, it's all very similar to the Frenzied Flame. Both the Primordial Crucible and the Great Serpent's, let's just say his appetite, it represents this same drive to erase all differences and go back to a unified state.
Okay, so we've got chaos, we've got unity, we've got some serious symbolism going on. What about the whole 3 fingers versus 2 fingers thing? Like, is that just a random hand gesture?
Nope. The document talks about how hands are often symbols of power, will, even attitude. So the fingers are definitely meant to represent something deeper about these forces.
So what's the deal with the numbers?
Well, 3, the number of fingers associated with the Frenzied Flame, it's often seen as a number of completeness, perfection, especially in biblical numerology. It's the first number that can define a plane. Think of a triangle, right? It represents wholeness.
But 2, the number of fingers representing the greater will, that's all about duality, division, separation. It's like taking that perfect unity of one and splitting it in half.
Exactly. And Aristotle, he actually said 3 is the first number to which the term all has been appropriated. So 2, by definition, implies a separation. A, not all.
And the document ties this back to Genesis too, right? With the separation of light and darkness, the division of the waters. It's all about the 2 fingers creating order by dividing things.
And this idea that our world, our differentiated reality, is a flawed departure from a more fundamental unity.
Yeah.
It's not just some frenzied flame craziness. The document quotes the Emerald Tablet, which says, "As above, so below. As within, so without." This idea of interconnectedness is ancient and widespread.
Yeah, and there are tons of accounts of people having these mystical experiences where they feel that unity, that dissolution of the self into something larger. The Emerald Tablet even talks about this undifferentiated unity and consciousness as all that is.
And that's the essence of non-dualism, right? The belief that all the divisions we perceive are illusions, and that chaos, that undifferentiated oneness, is the true reality.
So good and evil, light and darkness, all just different expressions of the same thing.
That's the idea. But then the document brings up this interesting point. What about mental chaos? Insanity, that lack of ability to discriminate, to hold on to coherent thought, the legal definition of insanity, being unable to tell right from wrong. It kind of highlights how we need those distinctions to function.
So is a completely undifferentiated world even possible or desirable?
That's a big question. And then there's Grant, who sees ultimate reality as this pure and perfect void. He says we need to merge into this formless awareness by recognizing the sameness of all things and seeing differences as purely illusory. So for him, individuality is the illusion and unity is the truth.
Whoa, okay, so we've got chaos, unity, and now we're talking about the ego. What's the deal with the color yellow in all of this? Like, why are the Frenzied Flame folks so into it?
Well, the document points to the golden robe from Demon Souls, which is all about madness, and shares that same yellow hue as the Frenzied Flame. It's a visual clue.
And yellow has historically been associated with unity, right? Both in terms of affection and spiritual power. The document even connects yellow robes to Buddhist monks who are all about transcending the material world.
And in Buddhism, there's often this idea of an inner spark of the Godhead within each person. And the goal is to suppress worldly desires and achieve union with the Supreme Spirit. Very similar to the Frenzied Flame's goal of merging back into the one great.
And what about the old monk from Demon Souls? He achieved enlightenment, but it was this weird dissolution of the self merging with the one thing, becoming part of this collective consciousness.
Yeah, it's like he completely lost his individuality. And the document even defines ego from the Century Dictionary as the I, that which feels, acts, and thinks. And that's exactly what the Frenzied Flame is trying to destroy.
So no more me, no more you, just the one great.
Right. And the Buddhist view of ego as this delusion, this false separation between I and not I, it's really relevant here. They see this dualism as the root of suffering. So gouging out your eyes like the Frenzied Flame folks do, it's a way of symbolically destroying the ego, destroying individual perception and experience.
So Hayata, with her whole eyeball eating thing, she's like a walking, talking crucible, taking in the experiences of others and merging them into this undifferentiated soup.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And the document emphasizes how the symbolism of chaos in this belief system is all over the place. Fire, light, the abyss, the sewers, the catacombs. It's all about returning to that undifferentiated state. Even Shiburi, he talks about wanting chaos to take over the world, burning the Erd tree and everything.
So the religion of the Frenzied Flame, it's not just about destruction, it's about a radical reimagining of reality, a return to a state of pure oneness, where all the divisions and distinctions we take for granted, they just melt away.
And it forces us to question our own assumptions, right? Like, what if the order we cling to is actually the source of our suffering? What if true liberation lies in surrendering our individuality and merging back into the chaos?
It's a scary thought, but it's also kind of fascinating. Like, are we really so sure that our way of seeing the world is the right one? Could there be a different way, a more fundamental truth hidden beneath all the separation and duality?
That's the question the Frenzied Flame leaves us with, and it's one worth pondering, even if it makes us a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, definitely food for thought. And maybe a little less food for Hayeta, if you know what I mean. Thanks for joining us on this, let's call it a mind-bending deep dive.
Absolutely, it's been a wild ride.
And for all you listeners out there, keep those documents coming. We'll be back with another deep dive soon.
Until then, stay curious. And maybe keep an eye on your snacks, just in case.
Okay, so you guys really went all in on this one.
Oh, goodness.
Religion of the Frenzied Flame. Like,
Okay,
seriously,
that's a replay.
deep dive into chaos itself.
Let me pause that. All right, so you heard it. Yes. That podcast will be available in my comment forum just by itself, so you can listen to it if you want. You can download it. I have a Catbox file. It's basically a WAV file. It's, just the podcast itself, not me speaking. And I will have my notes that you can basically download. That will be in the comment section, the description. I might very well even just make a comment too, just putting all of the information in it. If YouTube allows comments that, are that long. But basically, the podcast came from all of the information I have regarding the Frenzied Flame, everything I've collected thus far. I would say that what you heard is probably, if you know about these influences, then you know more about the game than most people. Let me put it that way. So I am planning to do more videos like this, because I have a lot of notes, but oftentimes, if I were to talk about something like this, I would be talking for, 40 or 50 minutes. And sometimes I just do not want to do that, but I want to get the information out to you. So if the volume of the video is good enough and you can hear it, hopefully you heard that well enough, then this may be a good way for me to share information with you in a relatively shorter period of time. Cutting the basically the size of the video down. So may you be blessed and farewell. This was quite enjoyable to do.